We strongly believe in having the numbers and making thoughtful budget recommendations rather than blithely throwing around numbers. In having facts and making thoughtful budget recommendations rather than blithely throwing around numbers. To that end, we partnered with our good friends at the Project on Government Oversight to release Spending Even Less, Spending Even Smarter, the cleverly named sequel to Spending Less, Spending Smarter. This report was a comprehensive collection of recommendations on how to save nearly $700 billion over the next decade across the traditional national security agencies, which include the Defense Department and the National Nuclear Security Agency. The report was intended as a list of cuts we could make without requiring major change in national security, since we believe our national debt and deficit problems are so pressing that they constitute an immediate threat. Yet that simple position is a departure from current national security doctrine, which holds that resources have no place in planning for the future. We vigorously oppose that point of view. And so do several recent Deputy Secretaries of Defense who wrote new Defense Secretary Chuck Hagel. They argued for an approach akin to the late Defense Secretary Les Aspin's bottom-up review. While one can and should quibble with that review and its outcomes, now as it was then, it is time to reassess defense posture and strategy, not only because the wars of the last decade are winding down, but also because, as the Deputy Defense Secretary said in their letter, quote, the long-term federal budget outlook indicates the direction of change. Force structure reductions, fewer and less lengthy overseas deployments, reduced research and development and procurement levels, and thus a slower rate of modernization of military equipment and systems. In short, they indicated that, quote, resources needed to pay for the posture must be determined. This approach is a major departure from the existing doctrine that military strategy must be formed independently, completely independent of fiscal reality. That doctrine is enshrined in the Quadrennial Defense Review, the process created in 1997 to focus Pentagon thinking on our defense posture in relation to current threats. Though the original legislation stated the process must consider the budget, quote, required to provide sufficient resources to meet its goals, the language was amended 10 years later to say the process should not be constrained by budgets. As we have long argued, it's exactly that kind of thinking that landed the Pentagon in the situation it faces today. The former deputy secretaries included several principles in their missive to Secretary Hagel. More cannot be done with less. It will take time to realize savings. The hard choices should be made early. The new U.S. strategy should address the new key geopolitical threats and leverage unique U.S. military capabilities. In the long run, U.S. military superiority relies on technology dominance. The growth and costs of military compensation and benefits system must be brought under control, and cooperation with allies will be even more important in the future. I think our report was very prescient in these regards. We do recommend hard choices. We do call for greater burden sharing. We do want smart investments in technology, not just what used to be the hot item, and compensation and benefits must be reformed. We focused on a variety of different programs, some that exist solely on the backs of their congressional champions, such as the M1 Abrams tank. Though the cost of such programs, $181 million in FY13 for the Abrams, may not sound like much in the grand scope of the defense budget, but as we've found in our work on earmarks, that bringing attention to parochially motivated spending has a ripple effect that can save taxpayers billions over the long run. There are some recommendations in our report that do reflect strategic positions. The one that got the biggest reaction from the Armed Services Committee staffers is cutting aircraft carriers from 11 to 10 and Navy wings from 10 to 9, which would save $18.4 billion. These are all 10-year recommendations, by the way, 10-year savings. This recommendation actually appeared in the Congressional Budget Office March 2011 report on deficit-reducing budget options, so it wasn't like it just came from throwing darts on the wall. Here's the plan. The Navy currently has one fewer aircraft carriers than the rest of the world combined. It used to be more, but the Chinese got their new carrier, and I say it new like that because when I saw the pictures, I saw the ski jump on the bow, and I thought that it was, oh, they took the Soviet style, you know, but then I realized, no, actually it was a Soviet Hulk that they had bought and were refurbishing and making, so anyway, I digress. According to the CBO, the Navy could utilize 10 carriers instead of 11 because recent experience suggests that the Navy mobilizes 5 to 7 carriers to fight a major war, and the 10 carriers remaining in the fleet under this option would still provide a force of at least 5 or 6 carriers within 90 days to fight such a war. CBO estimates that about $7 billion can be saved by retiring the USS George Washington in 2016, prior to its going through its costly refueling and complex overhaul process, and accordingly reducing Navy force size by 5,600 sailors. According to the CBO, this option also eliminates the administrative structure of the air wing associated with the carrier, but keeps the planes and redeploys other ships in the carrier strike group to support other missions. For even further savings beyond $7 billion, these ships and planes could be retired out of service. The USS Nimitz, the oldest of the Nimitz-class carriers, was commissioned in 1975 and has a 50-year service life. It can thus remain operational until the mid-2020s, or if it was a Coast Guard ship, it would probably be in the 2040s. The ship I served on was 50 years old when I served on it. But anyway, again, I digress. Chris is former Navy, so I have to kind of make those little jabs. When the Navy expects delivery of the CVN-80, the third Ford-class aircraft carrier. However, the USS John F. Kennedy, the second of the Ford-class aircraft carriers, is scheduled to be procured prior to this. Decommissioning the Nimitz early simply to make room for the John F. Kennedy or having both carriers in the fleet simultaneously offers little additional security at considerable cost. If the Navy forgoes procurement of the John F. Kennedy, taxpayers would save $11.4 billion in procurement costs alone. Altogether, taxpayers can save at least $18.4 billion while still maintaining a formidable 10-carrier fleet. Another recommendation that reflects a strategic shift would remove 40,000 troops from Europe. Downsizing our European footprint simply makes sense. We believe that they could be eliminated, the numbers could be limited, but some may redeploy in favor of our new Asian-Pacific focus if that is what the review recommends. In that case, it would represent a responsible prioritization regarding threats and missions rather than trying to be everywhere and do everything at once. Similarly, while the B-61 warhead is not the most expensive national security program, our recommendation is to ask America's European partners to pay for its maintenance reflects our belief that it's time for the U.S. taxpayers to stop footing the bill for the world's security. Several of our recommendations regard nuclear weapons for two reasons. One is that our military leaders, and as other panelists have stated, we can maintain an effective deterrence with far fewer weapons, which will save us money by reducing Cold War support system that has grown up around it. Second, the NNSA is one of the federal government's most inefficient agencies, regularly scoring a place on the Government Accountability Office's high-risk list. Making an example of systemic government waste can have a ripple effect that spreads to other parts of government, saving taxpayers money over time. So you could easily cancel facilities like the Y-12 uranium processing facility, which has doubled in cost into $6.5 billion since 2011, and the mixed oxide fuel fabrication facility, racking up another $5 billion. Years ago, I testified at a hearing on the F-22 Raptor cost overruns and problems. I vividly remember Congressman John Duncan, a Republican from Tennessee, remarking that sometimes instead of a Rolls-Royce, you have to settle for a Mercedes. So we could at least, even if we don't cancel the program outright, cancel this B and C variants of the F-35 and replace it with FA-18s. The savings from that from that alone are in excess of $60 billion and could be far greater if the whole program will be scrapped. The F-35 has continued to spiral out of control and is getting greater and greater criticism from our foreign allies who are being asked to purchase them. The last decade saw a dramatic increase in the number and cost of service contracts, which is being alluded to. While it's seductive, I know contracts and seductive don't necessarily go together, contracts actually often end up being more expensive than actually doing it in-house with public sector employees. Our colleagues at POGO found that the billable rate for contractors were often twice as much as the cost of federal employees. Additionally, the growth of contracts has been coupled with reduced oversight and oversight personnel. Simply reducing national security service contracts by 15% could save $400 billion. Lastly, I benefited from military medicine as a dependent and a service member. After 23 years of service, my father has been retired from the Navy for 30 years, and my parents live, in part, on his retirement checks. It was the deal he made with the government when he was commissioned as an ensign in 1959. The country has to honor that deal. But there are ways to do that responsibly. After retirement, my father used the GI Bill to get a master's degree and worked for more than a decade at a Fortune 500 company, all the while using TRICARE, well, its precursor actually, which in reality was a subsidy for the company that didn't have to pay for his and his family, like me, health care. Simply increasing premium and creating other incentives that don't affect the availability of TRICARE for those who need it, but also don't subsidize business would save as much as $100 billion without breaking that promise. That would be a small step, one that Congress has repeatedly blocked. But the entire benefits system has to be reevaluated. We have to honor and take care of our veterans, but we do them no favors if the country they so valiantly defended is a fiscal basket case. I want to end with this final thought that we try to talk about here. Is spending more will not make us safer, but spending smarter will make us stronger.